Welcome to episode 78 of The Route, presented by Jobs in Sports. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. So, a few things to cover as always before we get into today's guest. The first being, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching us live now on video, you can see on our YouTube channel. Just subscribe to the bottom here. And if you're listening on one of the many podcast platforms, just shoot a subscribe button, follow, whatever it is, or even rate a 5 stars. It just helps us grow as well. So just take some time doing that. And once you're done that, check us out on social media at The Route Sports. That's on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn's a big one that we have as well. So look for us there. You'll be able to see the different posts we make with these unique magazine covers that we make for each guest to kind of announce the release of the episode, and then from there maybe you can even get in the conversation or even see a way to connect with the guest. So check us out there. And that's about it. And now it's time for what everyone came for, to get in today's guest. So let me just bring them on here. Today's guest is Tamika, but as always, just a quick little introduction. So we're bringing on someone with experience in collegiate sport, MLSC, the CFL, and now the Canadian Olympic Committee, Assistant Marketing and Partnerships, Tamika Drysdale. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you for joining me this morning. And the way I like to start every single episode is pretty basic. As the name is, The Route. Do you mind taking us through yours? Or maybe where did you go to school and how did we get here today?
Of course. So I attended Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. So I actually went and I was a student athlete. So I played on the women's rugby team, and that kind of fueled my life in general. I've always been an athlete. So being able to play at the OUA level was, for me, just a huge accomplishment. And it really just kind of shaped who I was on the field and off the field. So I went to school for nothing related to sports. So I did a double major in women and gender studies and anthropology. But just kind of through all of the work I did on the women's rugby team and really engaging in different sports-specific clubs on campus, I quickly kind of realized, okay, I need to stay in this. Like, I know I'm not going to go to the Olympics, but I want to stay in this world of sport. So towards the end of my rugby career, I actually took a really bad injury which required surgery. So kind of during that recovery time, I really took the time to think about, okay, what do I do after university? I really now know I want to stay in sport. Like, kind of, where do I go with this? And fortunately, I was able to find the Humber sport management program. And in that program, I just kind of started to learn, like, okay, these are the things you need to know. Like, networking is huge, especially working in sport. And I started to take all of these tidbits and just put myself out there. Like, I volunteered at anything related to sport. If it was like track and field events, if it was selling 50-50 tickets at Leaf games, like, I just started putting myself in these spaces with other sport professionals. And then a year after being into the 3-year program at Humber, I was actually offered a full-time position with the Canadian Football League. So that was my first full-time job. Prior to that, I did some part-time work with MLSC, or I did some work with the Humber Athletics. But kind of that first opportunity, I was like, okay, what do I do? Do I finish the sport management program so I have that certification, or do I jump into the job force now? Because at the end of the program, I'm going to be up against all of my classmates. So I kind of spoke to my mentors, and they're like, hey, you already finished university, just get into the job force, because that's more like, that'll get you further than waiting 2 years and then going up against everybody that you just finished school with. So I kind of jumped into the role at the CFL, and the mentality going into any job is to always do stuff outside of what my job description dictates. So I made sure that my role was being done, but I also wasn't afraid to volunteer with other departments. I wasn't afraid to speak up and say, okay, who needs help? Like, in any way, shape, or form I could, just so that I could kind of tap into everything and really build my foundation as a sport professional. And I'm glad I did that, because it allowed me to work outside of just the partnerships team where I was hired. So I was the coordinator of partnerships, so dealing specifically with sponsorship, but I was, volunteering with the event team so that during playoffs and Grey Cup, I was on the field. I was doing so much that it just really helped round me out. And then I credit that because then when a position came up with the Canadian Olympic Committee, I had all these more skills that I could transfer over, or just experience of, hey, yep, this is what my job role was, but I actually worked with the marketing team, the digital team, and I was able to kind of really present myself as someone who would be an asset. And it paid off. And I still am like a little bit in shock that I got the role with the Canadian Olympic Committee, because it's like, you're representing Team Canada now. And it's just so great to be able to like take everything I've worked for, from being a student athlete to grinding it out in school, part-time jobs. And now I just am like, okay, awesome. Like I'm truly like working and doing this stuff on this platform. And I can't even say it's working, because it's one of those cliche items when it's like, when you truly love your job, it's not really work.
For sure.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of been amazing. And I still keep that same mentality of like not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to volunteer in different types of roles and capacities. And I'm just always trying to tap into different avenues of knowledge so that I can continue to like shape myself. I kind of never know where I'll end up. Like, I know I love the Canadian Olympic Committee, but, I always have high hopes for myself. And I'm just really excited to see where I kind of continue to take my career.
No, for sure. And that's like an amazing route so far. And obviously, for the reason I was looking down is because I was trying to take notes, because I already want to ask in the few minutes we've been speaking here. But so maybe let's just go back to the beginning here, because there's things I want to touch on there. But that's all great. So you're mentioning how you were playing rugby in uni, and one of the things that's kind of interesting is you're saying what you studied, right? And the reason why I find that so important is a lot of people listening are either current students or recently graduates, where hey, maybe they finished their undergrad and they're like, hey, should I go to a master's program, or hey, should I go get a a certificate, or different things like that, right? And that's kind of the biggest thing that's kind of stood out to me, where even at White Whale Marketing, the company that I have now, one of our guys that helps us out with marketing partnerships, he has a history degree, right? And maybe when I first started university, like, hey, that'd be odd for someone with a history degree to be working in marketing in sports. But he's unreal, like he's top notch, right? And then now it's kind of changed my whole like view of it a bit, where I was speaking to a student last week and they're like, hey, I'm finishing a finance degree, right? I'm like, hey, should I go to a sports master's program?
Okay.
And then kind of similar to you, right? Whereas, hey, no, I think you should, like my dad always told me, get experience. He's like, that's all that matters, right? Because yes, the degree is good and it'll maybe open some doors, but experience is what's really going to carry you along, or even like you're saying, make those connections, even kind of prove yourself, right? So I wanted to touch on that, right? Where did you ever have issues with, hey, not necessarily having a degree in sports, or was it more like, nope, we don't care, you have amazing experience, go ahead?
Yeah, so that's something I always had in the back of my mind of like, okay, if I'm up against a lot of other great candidates who do have that sport management degree or, those certifications, how will I measure up? But one of the things I thought of was just kind of in any job, it's like, especially sports, we all love it. It's entertainment, but we're not saving lives. So it's something where you could kind of learn what the role needs. So I never was like, okay, just because they have sport specific certification doesn't mean that it's not something I could tap into and learn on the job, or I could, spend the time outside of work. So I didn't really let it deter me, because at the end of the day, like you said, I think now we're also getting to an age where people just want to see what other work or experience you've done or where you've kind of put yourself. So I just made sure that anything I lacked in terms of certification, I made up with volunteer experience. So I was like, again, anything I could get my hands on, no matter how big or small, I was putting myself in those rooms with those other sport professionals, because you also never know who's going to work at a company you want to work for, or who has the hiring capacity. So I just kind of put my best foot forward. And even in job interviews too, I kind of use my past history as a student athlete to show like, hey, I know how to be a part of a team. I know how to make decisions. Like I kind of, really sold myself. And I feel like everyone needs to do that, even if you do have a sport management or, sport degree. If you really present yourself forward and show like, hey, these are the skills that I have that no matter what, they transfer over to what you need. I think that really, puts your foot forward. And it's just always never being afraid to be like, you know what, I could do this job. Like I am willing to grind it out, especially in sport. You have to be willing to kind of do those jobs that are, not so appealing to get to the jobs that you want, but you kind of have to have that mentality of just being a go-getter. And I think that really helped me, because I think a lot of the jobs I did get to, people notice that like drive and that energy of just like, I will get the job done and I will not be afraid to do whatever. And I think that really just kind of helped me stand out from the crowd and really set me apart from even the people who did have sports specific degrees or certifications.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all that, where even, some of the past experience I had, I'd ask directors or executives, I'm like, hey, how do you stand out? Or when you're hiring, what like makes you guys realize, hey, like this is the person we need to keep on? And it's exactly what you're saying, right? Where, sometimes they're telling me interns or entry level people would come on and their job description would be, X.
Yeah.
And then they're like, hey, I'm only doing X. And then maybe sometimes they're like, hey, like we need you to volunteer for this, or we need someone to volunteer for this, or we need someone to do something else. And someone's like, oh, I'm not doing that. That's not my role, right? But it's similar to what you're saying. When you say you're a go-getter and you actually go prove yourself, then we're like, yeah, we need this person in our team. So I completely agree with that. And one of the other things that you touched on at the beginning and a little bit now as well that I wanted to get into is you kind of asked the question, what am I going to do after uni, right? So did that question kind of propel you to be like, oh, wow, I need to get much more involved with, I don't know, like a sports business club or volunteering? Or did you enter university with the mindset of, hey, I'm just going to do this because that's how my thought process was going into this?
Yeah. So for me, it was like a pivotal moment, I think, when I really was like, okay, I need to start setting myself up to do sports specific work was when I did suffer a few injuries. So I actually suffered 2 very bad injuries in rugby. So one was a concussion, which actually took me out of play in school for an entire year. So that was already kind of scary. And then returning from that concussion, I suffered a knee injury, which required surgery for me to be able to even like walk normally for a little bit. So those 2 moments kind of really like hit me on the head of like, okay, you love sport, you love playing, but how do you stay within this world of sport without playing? Because it's like, a hard reality I think every athlete faces of like, okay, where are you taking your sports career? Like, are you trying to aim for Team Canada? Are you going to go play in Europe? Like, and when you kind of realize like, okay, like I love the sport, but I know I'm not going to go any further than university. So what do I do next? And for me, Laurier had a lot of great sport organizations and clubs on campus. So I slowly started to get involved in things like Right to Play Canada. And then Laurier had something called the Laurier Letterman Club. So it was student athletes giving back to the community. So I started to get heavily involved in that as well, because it was like, okay, like I still get to hang out with my student athletes. I still get to like be with them, but we're doing different things and using the power of sport to kind of fuel that. So the more I got invested in that club, I was like, okay, I really like this like behind the scenes stuff. And I was very fortunate enough to actually become the first female president of that club on campus. And through that experience too, I think it even like sparked something more in me of like, wow, like I set my mind to something, I spent the time volunteering, and now look at what I've just accomplished. Like, this is huge. And I think that then really started to shape more of my decisions for, okay, as soon as I finish university, what's that next step? And then that's when I kind of toyed between going into a sports specific program and even just being like, can I automatically jump into the workforce with some other jobs? But speaking to some mentors and some other people that had graduated before me, they're like, hey, just try the program, because again, that taps you into a new network that gives you new opportunities to volunteer. So just go there and see what happens. So I'm truly thankful that I took that advice, because like I said, I only finished 1 year of the 3-year program before I had a full-time job offer. So it was great that I did have university completed, because not everyone has that, opportunity to be like, okay, I've already finished 1 degree, so it's okay if I don't finish this one. But I think just kind of like the transition from student athlete to just student and then to graduate really kind of just like put me on that path of like, what do we do now so that I could still stay in this world of sport and still be a part of it without actually being an athlete on the field?
Yeah, no, and that completely makes sense, right? Where I think maybe even, obviously you're a student athlete, but I think maybe all students as well, there's a time in university where it kind of hits you like, oh, wow, like this academia that you've been doing for since you're 4 or 5, this is ending, right? So it's time to figure it out, right? And I know that I kind of got slapped in the face at the end of second year where it's, oh, wow, like this is ending in, short order here, right? So that's when, like similar to yourself, where you had that realization where, oh, maybe I got to start looking at different avenues and, networking. So then that kind of propelled me, kind of motivated me to do a bit more. But
yeah,
that makes sense. And then in regards to, you started the second degree, right?
yeah.
And you said after 1 year you're comfortable enough to leave because you had that position offered.
Yes.
Why maybe getting into that a bit, because obviously you've touched on the volunteering, the work experience with clubs, and even just working wherever you can and networking.
Yeah.
How did that first position get offered, right? Because maybe a lot of people listening, that's the current position they're in, right?
Yes.
So how does that work?
Of course. So while I was at Humber, I was working in the Humber Athletics and Recreation Department. So I was just doing stuff like timekeeping and game scoring at like basketball events. Like, again, still in that world of athletics, because I was like, okay, perfect. Anything I could learn here is easily transferable. And so while I was still in school in that first year, I was also able to get a part-time job with MLSE. So in their real sports apparel kiosk. So again, just like at games, selling jerseys, but I was still in that world. And again, networking, doing whatever I could to just be like, okay, do you need volunteers anywhere else? And then what had happened was I went to a Hamilton Tiger Cats game and I saw a past Lori Golden Hawk that I used to work with at the gym. She was on the field and I kind of was like, okay, like, is she just like, someone's friend or family that just got like a super sweet pass and is on the field? But something in me was like, okay, just send her like a LinkedIn note after and just like see how she got there. So again, this is where networking is huge. And it was just one of those opportunities where I had worked with her in some capacity at Laurier. And I just kind of reached out, was like, hey, like I saw you working at the CFL game. Like, can you just tell me more about your role? Like, how did you get into it? And we just kind of had a small conversation. She told me what her role was in, which was in marketing partnerships there. And I just kind of threw it out there of like, okay, well, can you like keep me in mind if there are any, jobs or intern opportunities, like I'd love to, like I'd be interested. And it's one of those things you throw out there and like some people will actually follow up with you and other people you just don't hear from. But she actually followed up with me a few weeks later and was like, hey, there's this job opportunity. I'll send it over to you. If you're interested, apply. So I was like, okay, perfect. And because of the relationship I already had with her at Laurier, she was someone who could definitely speak to like, my work ethic, who could speak to like me as a person, because I think something else that really does help is when you're applying for a job, if someone on the other end is able to see you as the person and not just the resume. So it was nice having her through my networking skills to be able to just kind of be like, yeah, I can vouch for Tamika as a person, that what she has on her resume speaks volumes to like who she is as a person. So that at least got me in the door for an interview. And then in the interview again, I just made sure I was selling myself. I was saying, hey, I know I don't have the certifications that you want, but like, here's what I've taken from my experience as a student athlete. Here's what I've taken from my experience as the president of a student run club. And I kind of just try to hit on everything. I also went into that interview extremely prepared. I did research into the company itself. I did research into the teams. I made sure that they could see from the jump that I was dedicated and like, hey, I'm doing all this work for a job interview. What do you think I'll do for you if I get to work for you?
For sure.
So that interview process actually took, I think, about like a month and a half. I had a total of about 3 interviews. And then it was something where they're like, okay, we'll, let you know. So still finishing up the first year of school, I get a call and they offer me the job. So I was like, yes, like, okay, I did it. And then that's where I had to, make the decision between staying and finishing the sport management program or kind of just jumping into the workforce of like, let me just get my feet wet in a full-time position because then it's easier to navigate once you're in the sport industry. It's a lot harder to navigate on the outside, but as soon as you get in, it's a lot easier because especially in Canada, it's kind of like the same people that you're going to be surrounded with. So that's when I made the decision to accept the full-time job. And one of the first things too that they said to me after I did get the job, they're like, hey, like other people did have more of the exact skills we're looking for, but the energy and the drive and how you presented yourself made you stand out. And we know that like you're willing to learn. So even hearing that, I was like, okay, wow, I did set myself apart. So so it was just kind of a mixture of volunteering, kind of taking any job I could and then continuing to like do outreach and network while I had those part-time jobs to really try to put myself in the best position to be considered for a full-time job. So a lot went into it, but the key parts I really stress there is just how networking is key, because that small connection I was able to make really helped at least get my foot in the door for a job interview. And then continuing to like really grind it out and work hard, I was able to get offered the full-time job with the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, and that, like, as you're saying that, I was just kind of thinking on my own, right? Where you're like, hey, networking is key, and you're kind of basically walking us through how you kind of first made that connection and how that led to the position.
Yeah.
In my mind, and I'm sure maybe people listening did something similar, like, hey, how did I get my foot in the door, right? And I'm like, I don't think I did networking. But then as I thought about it, I'm like, oh, you know what? I think I mentioned it to a professor. Professor mentioned it to somebody else, and then they kind of verified me, and they're like, okay, he said he's good. And then once I had that, I was legit. Then it kind of just started the ball rolling. I was able to meet people easier. And as you were saying that, I was like, oh, wow, like, you're absolutely right. Obviously, everyone knows, networking is key.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think how it's almost a snowball effect, like you're saying, right? Where, hey, you saw a former alum that you may have worked with at the Hamilton game, and then one thing led to another, and just kind of went on from there, which is for sure interesting. Because another thing that kind of popped in my mind when you're saying that is one of the questions I had when I was, 18. If someone's listening, everyone hears, oh, networking is key. Networking is key. It's all about who you know. And okay, that's great. But what if you don't know how to network, right? I never went to an event, right? Coming out of high school, you're never really taught how to do that naturally, right? So do you have any tips for those people to kind of make those initial connections if they don't have someone that they may have worked with in the past, or have any kind of connections already into the industry? Do you have any maybe tips and tricks for that?
Yeah. So what I realized quickly is that I was networking before I even knew what networking is.
Yeah.
Essentially what it was just being it's being your true authentic self and just treating people with respect. Because again, like the job that I worked with her at Laurier, we didn't fully work together. It was only really in passing, but it was more of like, oh yeah, you were great to work with. I heard great things about you. So it's just like, oh wow, okay. So I was networking and I didn't even realize it was just, being nice to people, being courteous, and just kind of being aware of your surroundings, even if you are not at a specific event, but just be aware that people could see what you're doing. So if you're at any type of public thing, especially if it's in something you eventually want to work at, essentially don't be like an idiot in public, because you never know who's seeing that, or you never know who you're coming into brief contact with that could help you later. And then when I really understood the power of networking, that's when, again, I was putting myself in any position, 50-50 tickets at Leaf games or Raptors games, just smiling at people, being nice, introducing myself. Because again, you never know where those people will end up and what kind of high-end capacity or what kind of, power they might have. Even the people that I went to school with for Humber, even for that 1 year, I still kept in contact with them, because I'm like, okay, when you finish school and you're going into the job force, you could be at different companies that maybe I want to collaborate with later, or maybe I want to, work with. And it's not specifically always having every chat being like, so how's your career going? This is how my career going. Yeah. It's mainly just, being nice. How are you doing today? What's going on with you? Even when I make LinkedIn connections, if I'm sending an invite to someone, I try to include a little intro about me, especially if I've only met them in one small capacity. I just, hi, this is Tamika Drysdale. We volunteer together at X event. I would love to be connected with you and learn more about your career path. So I send, a quick message like that with my LinkedIn kind of request, so that it's not just my name asking to be connected. Because, some people too on LinkedIn, if they don't really know who you are, they're like, okay, I'm not going to accept you into my network. So my biggest tips for just networking is, be mindful of your surroundings, just be respectful to people, because you never know where those people will end up, or, when you might cross paths with them again. And also just kind of put yourself in spaces big or small. So you don't have to be volunteering at huge events. It could be, your local YMCA club. It could be anything. Just kind of put yourself in those spaces of where you eventually want to work at, or you want to work with, because you never know how that'll pay off.
For sure. And, it's so interesting how, I think this episode will be number 78. So over all these episodes, the one common theme that kind of everyone touches on is everyone kind of always says how it's kind of interesting how far being nice gets you,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where they're like, you'd be surprised how some people don't have the, I don't know, I guess you can say common sense just to think, hey, what might actually get you
Yeah.
the furthest in your career is just being a decent person, right?
Yeah.
Where it's funny whether it's either on screen or afterwards when I'm speaking to people. That's kind of the biggest thing everyone says. So I for sure agree with that. And then the other thing in regards to LinkedIn, I for sure that's how I got in contact with you, right? With those little notes. So proof is in the pudding there.
Yeah.
But that's 100% where I've even spoken to people where, if you're thinking of, I don't know, let's say the CEO of some sporting organization or club, team, brand, whatever, they get, if you look at their, I think it says follows or connections on LinkedIn, thousands,
Yeah.
right? You can only imagine what that inbox looks like or what that, those notifications for friend requests are like. So I'm sure everyone that kind of says, hi, I'm Chris, add me, they're
Yeah.
like, no, like there's no value, right? And that's kind of the biggest thing where my marketing degree has probably helped me, surprisingly, not necessarily with what I learned in school, but more so a value exchange, right?
Yeah.
Where, like you're saying, when you reach out to someone, you're like, hey, we met here, blah blah blah. Let's connect. Let's see how things are going, rather than, hey, give me this, give me a job, right?
Exactly.
What are they getting out of it, right? Where, it kind of needs to have that balance. So I for sure see that, and obviously it's worked for you, and it's worked for many other people as well. So proof is in the pudding, as they say.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to touch on, so you kind of mentioned now how you got into the role of the CFL, and you've touched on it earlier as well, what kind of that involved, but
Yes.
do you mind maybe going more in depth of what that whole position looked like? So maybe people interested in working with the CFL or interested in working in a position like yours, what that kind of entails.
So the position I got at the CFL was the junior coordinator of marketing partnerships. So again, the role was heavily focused on the sponsorship side of business. And the job that I got was at the head office for the CFL. So all of the affiliate teams kind of funneled up into the head office. And when it came to the playoffs in the Grey Cup game, that's where the CFL office was responsible. So we had to fully set up, execute, and ensure that all those games ran smoothly. So in the role as junior coordinator, I kind of just supported the account teams, the business development team, and then just supported the partnerships team as a whole. So that was what my job description depicted. But again, I was doing work with the event team, the Grey Cup hospitality team. I kind of had my hand in everything. And in that role, I think it was only about 10 months later where I was able to be promoted. So I was promoted to then coordinator of marketing partnerships. So more responsibility. I was able to help manage communication between the head office and all the CFL teams. I did things like taking lead on hospitality for playoff and Grey Cup games. So just kind of like ticket organization. I had the ability to then lead on some small account partnerships. So some of our partners that came on specific just to the playoffs and Grey Cup, I had a role in communicating with them, making sure that all their assets were delivered. So kind of, again, just taking on more responsibility, showing that, hey, I did so well in the junior coordinator role, like I'm willing to take on more. So in that role between junior coordinator and coordinator, I just soaked up, again, as much knowledge as I could. I learned from the account managers, okay, what's the best way to communicate with partners? How do you problem solve? What's the best way to set up touch points with them? From the business development team, I learned how to do things like prospecting. So how do I really see what's a good partnership for the CFL and other brands out there? So I was able to then, shift my thinking as well of okay, when I see a brand, how does it authentically line up? So then I started thinking different in different aspects. Even just doing stuff of just how do you reach out to a company that you do want to work with? So I kind of tapped into them there. And then I was super involved in just wanting to learn more about the actual event execution space. So the volunteer work I did there was how do we bring the games like the Grey Cup to life? And seeing all of the hard work that goes into it. My first Grey Cup game was in Ottawa.
Oh, that's
So being able to be on the field while that game was going on was the most surreal moment, because it's wow, all of these like behind the scenes work, everything that we put in. And now I'm standing on the field during the Grey Cup game and watching it just like come to life. So
Mhm.
that was this biggest moment of like, aha,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like the work that we're doing, a lot of people might not see because it is behind the scenes, but
Mhm.
the fact that we know that people enjoy the game, that the game was such a success and so exciting, it's like I had a role in that. I had a hand in that. So, yeah, again, I just kind of took the role that I had and I continued to branch out of my specific job description to make sure that
Mhm.
I was like touching on a little bit of everything. And that all was super integral in my changes in terms of leaving the CFL and joining the COC. But yeah, I highly credit that role for
Yeah.
really kind of like building the foundation for me as an
Yeah.
employee.
That's so funny in regards to the Grey Cup that was in Ottawa, because it's funny how there's been so many guests how that event has kind of all intertwined. Where I actually worked there when
Oh, wow.
I was in university, so I was working outside before I kind of switched to more business roles. But like
Yeah,
I worked at TD Place for 3 years, so that was
amazing.
you were there. I think I had three other guests. That I think I had two others as well. That was their first event either with the Argos or with the CFL.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting how that one event, especially Ottawa of all places, kind of
Oh,
connects
yeah.
a few people on the podcast. But
Yeah.
that's interesting, and it was a funny night because I think it was snowing like crazy.
Yep.
Wasn't Was this Shania Twain pulled on Huskies? Was that?
Yep.
Yeah, it was just interesting. Yeah, yeah. But
Oh, yeah.
then yeah, it's funny how that connects it to everyone, and obviously like you're saying, you did focus on marketing pregnancy, but obviously you did dabble in other things as well, which is very interesting. And one of the things you said that kind of maybe pops out, maybe especially for me in regards to what I'm doing, but I think there's value for others as well, is
Yeah.
you're mentioning how with partnerships, you're prospecting and seeing how you guys can connect authentically. And
Mhm.
then I always agree with that because I think that's where, those relationships really go the furthest.
Yeah.
But then following that, you ask the question of, you kind of figure out how do you reach out to a company you want to work with?
Yeah.
So you asked, or you kind of proposed that question, but maybe can you answer it as well? Because that's something that is, I find you could always find new ways or even different avenues, I guess you could say, to answer that question.
Yeah. So the approach I kind of took from like different people that I worked with or saw
Mhm.
working was once you've kind of identified a brand that kind of fits authentically again with your organization or your club. So you see a lot of natural tie-ins of like,
Mhm.
okay, so for example, Canadian Football League, if you see something that has to do with like recovery for athletes, you're like, okay, a completely natural tie-in. It makes
Mhm.
sense already. Then I do kind of like some deep dive research into the brand itself. I look at what are their values, what is their mission statement, what other organizations are they partnered with, or organizations that they volunteer with, because that also speaks volumes for their brand as well when you
Mhm.
understand what they stand for as a company. And then kind of once I've taken all that information, I then put together kind of just like a quick note of this is your mission statement. Look at how it aligns with our mission statement. Here are your values, and this is how it lines up with our CFL values. You're already working with X organization. We've done work with them as well. So I kind of try to build as many bridges between
Mhm.
the companies so that when I do reach out, either an initial email, I could kind of speak to those hot points. Hello, I'm reaching out on behalf of the Canadian Football League, already kind of give them a little synopsis of where the similarities and the alignment is. And then
Mhm.
when you get them on a phone call, fingers crossed, you get them on a phone call, then you
Yeah.
can kind of elaborate further on those. Oh, we see the great work you're doing with X
Mhm.
company. We also dedicate a lot of our time to that because we believe in the value of family. Or you just kind of really present to them and show them like how great your brands would be together because of
Mhm.
what they stand for and what they represent and what they're working towards. And that really just helps because then it's easier for them to visualize. If you're pitching to a company that has no connection with you, they're like, okay, I don't really, see how it works. But if you're pitching to a company where they're like, oh, wow, yes, we believe in that as well. We're doing similar work. Yes, we have the same end goal. Then it's a lot easier to kind of picture how something could come to life.
Mhm.
And then if you make it to the next stage of being able to present them something, a big thing that you like to do is, make sure that they see themselves in the presentation, even if it's as simple as, having their logo in the presentation, having some of their colors, highlighting some of their campaigns again, or if you're trying to sell them specific assets, include their logo in those assets so they could truly see, oh, wow, I'm seeing it come to life. I'm seeing, how this can be executed. All of those little pieces and touch points really make them feel like you put the time and the work in to understand who we are as a business. And you've presented, this great avenue. So I've taken that from like so many different people I've worked with, but I think all of that really helps make it easier when you're reaching out, because it's easier for them to understand the potential opportunities, the potential collaboration, and the potential partnership.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's great. I was trying to write that down, and maybe we'll find a way to clip it if I get my video editing skills good enough. But no, that's great. And one of the other things I guess I kind of wanted to ask him about that. So we kind of do something similar where we work with or I should say, not we the route, but White Whale Marketing, where the route's underneath. We work with athletes and we, help them out with sponsorships. And one of the things that we've kind of been noticing is we've gone the very warm lead route. Yeah. And obviously that's something that's a little easier to do. And we also on the cold outreach where, you use these tools where it gives you some random, or not random, it gives you the email, but it's a cold outreach where the person almost asking themselves, hey, how did you get my email? Right.
Yeah.
So, is there like a happy medium that you find works well, or how do you maybe even make those initial connections, right? Is it just simply from those networking tips and tricks that you mentioned earlier, or how did that come about to kind of further?
Some of them are like those cold reach outs where you see the potential and what it could be. And I think it's a mixture of kind of narrowing in like who you're reaching out to. So when you're talking about like athlete specific, sometimes it's also thinking outside of the box of not your like, go to like, oh, like everyone has like a burger partner or everyone has this. It's also thinking about, okay, where are we at in the world? What are new things? Food delivery is a big thing, or people are doing more in terms of pastime. So relaxation, mental health has become a very important thing for people to speak about. So it's like just seeing where the world is and then using that filter of then narrowing it down to what makes sense for your athlete or for your brand.
For sure.
And at least it still could be like those cold calls, or, you do somehow find their email, but at least if you're presenting it of like, hey, we've done, the work and we believe this is a great opportunity, it's easier for them to then be like, okay, I'm not going to be too concerned with how you found my email then, because, you are presenting a great opportunity. So like, let me hear about it a bit more. But yeah, that's where I say like my train of thought kind of changed working with business development is now sometimes I see things, I'm like, oh, that's a great partner in this space, or that would be great for this. But it's like, you kind of have to think that way because you need to think out of the box, or you need to keep being innovative to kind of see those partnerships that are no longer traditional, because that's kind of where the world is going anyway. So like you could really get ahead of the curve if you're thinking like that, instead of just being like, okay, I need this kind of partner and I need this kind of partner because everyone has it. So it's just strategically thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Where so I think it was a couple of days ago, or maybe it was last week.
Yeah.
I had a meeting, went very well. I reached out to the athlete, tell them, they're like, oh, that's interesting. That's not something they would have thought of, right? Because usually athletes are like, oh, equipment, hydration, X, Y, Z. And I told them what it was, and they're like, huh, I never thought of that. But they're like, hey, it fits, right? Because they're interested in outdoor, so kind of fit. But then I completely agree where sometimes the best calls we've had sometimes are just the ones that are so unique but are so authentic to what their interests are, where it's not necessarily what an athlete would typically have, but that's, I guess, how you kind of further it. So for sure see that as well. And then kind of getting back to your route again, obviously you're touching on your experience at the CFL, and then I'd like to now get into the COC, right? So how did that come about? Was it through someone you met at the CFL, someone you knew in the past? How did that position come up, and how did you get in there?
Yeah. So again, networking, and shout out to Phil and Golden Hawks, because again, it was someone who I had kind of worked with in some capacity at Laurier, again, in like the gym facility. And when I was just kind of reaching a point at the CFL where I was like, okay, I think I've taken, everything I can from this role, and I'm looking to broaden it. When I was reaching out, when I look at organizations that I want to work at, I kind of do, again, a little bit of a deep dive. Okay, who works there? What do they stand for? Like, what opportunities are available? I came across a fellow Golden Hawk, and again, I just, sent a LinkedIn message. Hey, it's been a long time since we chatted. I would love to, pick your brain. And they were amazing. And again, sat down with me and chatted with me about just their experience themselves. And when I put my resume in, it was a person on the inside who, again, could speak to me as a person, could, kind of vouch for what I'm saying and putting on my resume. So that at least helped me get a foot in the door. And in addition to that, I did kind of tap into my current network too of people I knew at the CFL, people I knew at MLSE. I was like, hey, do you know anyone that works at the Canadian Olympic Committee? Could you just reach out on my behalf? And when it came to that, I just, touched on people that I had that strong relationship with. You never just want to reach out to someone you're only slightly connected to be like, speak to this person. But the people I had good relationships with, I just asked them, and a lot of them did. So it kind of helps that I had not only someone on the inside to kind of vouch for me, but other people in, senior positions being able to reach out to people they knew to just say, again, like, yes, I've worked with Tamika. She's great. Like, I could speak to her as a person. So that at least helps my resume stand out, because now they're seeing a person and it's not just a piece of paper. And then when I got, I think, again, that was about 3 or so interviews to go through. I put my best foot forward. I talked about, hey, look at all the skills I've gained from working with Humber Athletics, working with MLSE, working with CFL, just kind of shaping how I could do the job itself, but also speaking to the other things that I believe I could bring to not only the role, but to the team and to the organization. So that definitely helped, because again, I was up against some stiff competition. And then I think that took almost like 2 months before I really heard back, just because it's like, something like the Canadian Olympic Committee, they get so many resumes and applicants, then they go through so many interviews. So I kind of was even getting a little stressed of like, do I try to apply other places, or do I just kind of wait and hold out? Because I don't want to accept a different role and then they call me. So I just had to hold my breath a little bit, but I did get the role. And again, surreal and just so excited, but I've kind of taken again my role and my job description, and I do that job for sure, but I've branched out and I really put myself in a position where I feel like I'm an asset to my team, an asset to the organization, because I'm willing to do more than just what was told to me as, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. It's like, I've made that role my own. And I feel good about the position I'm in, and I'm excited to see where my career will continue to grow, either inside the organization or outside of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. And that's very interesting, where one of the things, like every time someone says something, I just start getting all these different ideas, but one specific one I'd like to get into is, you're kind of touching on how when you're going through that process, you kind of made yourself more, or you made the COC view you more as a person rather than, let's say, a CV. And I find that super interesting, just because when I was in my last semester of university, I believe, obviously throughout I was applying to the CFL, Red Blacks, et cetera, right? Teams in the area. And, mild success, right? Maybe they're like, oh, you don't have enough experience, right? Because you're still a student. But then what really kind of kicked it off, and I was always kind of getting into the interviews, and I felt like once I had the interview, then I'd be able to move forward, was, what was it? It was, I went to a networking event and I kind of just introduced myself. They finished speaking, was the first one to see them, had one of the other things I did with my CV, I made it a triple thickness of paper. So when you felt it, and it was all black, so it kind of stood out. And from then on, I found the directors I met, they're like, hey, to the HR lady, do you mind maybe just red flagging the CV, even though maybe he's not qualified? Let's at least get him into the process, right? When I was a student, so I definitely see that the difference, right, where you kind of stand out versus a person versus a CV. The person always wins, right? So I definitely see the impact on that. And then, as always, I'd like to also get into the position that you're in now, similar how you spoke on it at the CFL. So what does it entail now? Obviously, the Olympics just ended, so I'm sure it must have been crazy. But what kind of things does this role look like for those interested?
Yeah, so my role is the assistant of the marketing partnerships team. So honestly, a little bit similar to my role at the CFL. So I support the account teams, the business development team, and then our commercial affairs team. So kind of like where you see the Team Canada marks out in public or licensing, that's kind of what our commercial affairs team deals with. But then outside of supporting those 3 different facets of the partnerships team, I help with just overall team management and to ensure we're all working towards our collective goals. And then within the marketing partnerships department as well, let's just, working with like the brand team in different capacities to execute programs, or just working with like the digital team. So in this role, it's great because it's very multifaceted, and I kind of, again, am in a position to get my hands on a little bit of everything and kind of like pick the brains of people that are doing stuff. And I've just been like running with anything that's given to me, any
Yeah.
kind of project I work with. So I help and support a lot of partner specific programs. So programs that you see in the market that are supporting athletes directly. I
Mhm.
help behind the scenes to, ensure that those programs are executed, that athletes are happy, that, assets are being delivered. And then when it comes to smaller things in the background, it's, supporting to ensure that during the Olympics, like when you saw different campaigns or you saw
Mhm.
different ads, that was being executed appropriately so that our partners are still receiving their value. So again, it's a lot of very behind the scenes work, but then when
Mhm.
you do see it in public or you do see it on screen, you're like, yeah, like I had a
Yeah.
role in that. And like people don't even realize what goes into seeing a Cheerios box that has an athlete on it,
Yeah.
or seeing a commercial that has a partner logo log up. So in this role, again, it's really big in the sponsorship space, and that's
Mhm.
a space I honestly never thought I'd fall in with sports.
Mhm.
But it's truly amazing to kind of see all the work that goes into telling the athlete story, telling the Team Canada story, in all these different avenues.
For sure. And the funny thing you just said there is, I think that's kind of the cool thing about sports. Obviously, it's very cool just working in sports and something you're passionate about,
Mhm.
but it's almost seeing your work come to life, right? Where it almost provides you that additional value. Where sometimes, like previously, I was in accounting in
Yeah.
university, right? Obviously, that's good stuff. People are getting their pay, everyone's happy. But when I'm just on Excel all day, you don't really see the impact your work has, right?
Yeah.
But in sports, if you're, let's say, grinding out on an activation, on graphics, on a campaign,
Yeah.
as much work as you put into it, you then see it in person, right? Where I'm sure during the Olympics, as it was going on, you're like, oh, hey, like you're saying the Cheerio box, you're like, you
Yeah.
wouldn't believe, right? Where you almost have a bunch of little intricate stories whenever you see something with when you're spending time with someone. So I for sure see that. That's very interesting. And then the other thing that you kind of mentioned, which maybe kind of sparks my interest just because of the
Yeah.
field of work that I'm in, you're touching on you guys work with programs that specifically help athletes. Does the partnership team at the COC also help with partnerships for athletes, or is that something that's going to be evolving more with time?
Yeah, so we kind of help, we're like the middleman when it comes to
Yeah.
partners with Team Canada and specific athlete sponsorship. So we'll help facilitate, the meeting between if a partner wants to work specifically with an athlete or multiple athletes.
Mhm.
But then it's on the partners to kind of sign those individual deals. And we kind of take ourselves out of that because then again, it becomes a deal between a partner and a specific athlete. But we always do our best because all of our partners and the deals that they sign with Team Canada are supporting athletes on some level. So
Yeah.
it's either, supporting their journey to the games, even if it's not them running a specific program that, relieves some type of financial stress or
Mhm.
training stress. So that's another part that I do love about working in partnerships is just seeing all the different ways of like how we're making sure that when our athletes are, on the Olympic stage, that they're supported in the best way possible. So
Yeah.
at Team Canada, we try to facilitate that as much as possible. We really work hard to ensure that our Team Canada athletes, have every opportunity in the world with different partners, different
Mhm.
activations, different programs, because we know when they're not thinking about money or thinking about training equipment, that's when they perform the best. And all we want to do is ensure that they're performing the best they can on the world stage.
Yeah, no, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I
Yeah.
guess the way I like to wrap up every interview is kind of two basic questions, I'd say.
Okay.
What's the first one? I just forgot it. Oh, you think after all these episodes, I'd remember off the top. So the first one is, obviously, you touch on your experience throughout this whole episode. Very cool things that you've been a part of. But when you're going to be, in your 80s, hundreds, maybe 120s with technology, we don't know. But what's maybe a story to date that kind of has stood out in your career, right? It's going to be something referring to the Grey Cup, the Olympics. What's a
Yeah.
story that you're like, wow, I can't believe I've been able to do that for work?
Oh, wow. I think it would have to go back to my first Grey Cup experience because that was my first full-time job in the sport industry, first experience of really like being at this crazy event and
Yeah,
being
yeah.
like, oh wow, like this is coming to life because of all of this work and all of these months of preparation. So for me, I think that has been one of the highlights of my career because that was that first moment of like, you did it kind of thing. Like I
Mhm.
took that moment to really take it in of like, wow, like I've succeeded and I'm going to continue to exceed. So I think that first Grey Cup in Ottawa, standing on the field, like I was right there when the teams are rushing out because they celebrated. I'm there at the end of it too, when like they're handing off the Grey Cup and there's, confetti all over the ground. Like, I think to me, that's an experience that I'll cherish with me forever, because that really just kind of solidified that all of the like grind, all of the hard work truly pays off. And then it continues to like be that fuel of like, you want more moments like that, you want more moments of celebration when everyone's excited and had such a great time and you were part of what made that come to life.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, just what you were saying there at the end, because I think that was the last event, because I worked there for 3 years. It was my last event because I already had an accounting job. So I was like, hey, I gotta be more serious now. I can't be doing this fun stuff anymore.
Yeah.
But then I was kind of in between period where I was working both jobs and going to school.
Yeah.
And I think that week, just because I loved the job so much and the Grey Cup was so exciting, I think I worked 60 hours that week as a part-time employee. Yeah. And when I left that week, because that was the last event, as I said, I went into my accounting job. I'm like, oh man, like, that's what I want. Like, I miss that. Like, that's the only thing I'm chasing again. And then after a year in accounting, I was like, oh, no way. Like, I got to get back to that. Like, that's what I loved. And it was kind of interesting that you said something similar where you're like, hey, like, I just want to be a part of those, moments of celebration, or, just seeing things come to life. Right. So that's very interesting that you say that. And the last question. So we went to the future. And now let's go to the past a bit. So let's say you're able to speak to an 18-year-old Tamika, or an 18-year-old Chris, or even, an 18-year-old listening now who's just about to start university. And probably the time this episode comes out, they're going into their first week of school.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them, right? Whether it's life, whether it's career, what is something that you felt has helped you over, the last number of your career, or last few years of your career, that you really find stick out?
Oh, wow. I think the biggest piece of advice is be true to you and use whatever is driving you to pursue your dreams, and kind of let nothing come in between that. So don't ever allow like the education that you have or the certifications that you have deter you from what your end goal is. Kind of a lot of the things we talked about is, I don't have that sports specific certification, but I've never allowed that to take away from what I want to do in life. Yeah. And it's just a mixture of that and just being authentic to yourself. Like at the end of the day too, especially in jobs, people want to just know if you're a good person to work with, if you're a good person to join their team. So if you're authentically yourself and you stand true to what you value and what you see for yourself, that will truly get you far, because you're not putting on a facade. You're not trying to be something that people want you to be. You're kind of saying, this is who I am. This is what I'm passionate about, and I'm going to work hard to get it. So I would definitely say that to myself, and, kind of stick through all of the trials and tribulations. Nothing comes easy in life, but if you kind of stick through it and push hard, you will see the success, you will see the accomplishments, and you'll be very proud of the work that you'll be able to do. So I think that's what I'd say to a young me.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly said. And that's almost, I couldn't agree more with that, where it's almost that saying where, someone can give you a ball, but it's all about what you do with it, right?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of same with education, right? You can have Harvard, Ottawa, Wilfrid, Laurier, and whatever little discipline you want, but it's really about, hey, what do you do after the degree, right? Are you gonna dive into the field, get that experience, and kind of make a name for yourself, let's say? Yeah. And so I couldn't agree with that anymore, and that's why I love asking that question at the end, because I find it's a perfect way to end it. So unless there's anything else you'd like to share, I really appreciate it. As you saw, I was just writing down, so you didn't think I was ignoring you. I was just trying to write these down so I wouldn't forget. But that was amazing. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? But
I honestly just want to thank you. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for allowing me to be on this podcast. It's always just great to talk to other people too, who are excited about sport and have that passion for it. So thank you for the opportunity to just get to speak with you today.
Yeah, no, those kind words. Thank you. But pleasure's all mine. Thank you.